My name is Clara Whitman, and I am 34 years old. Until recently, I believed I had learned to manage the quiet humiliations that came with being the overlooked daughter. I thought I had developed armor strong enough to withstand the constant comparisons to my younger sister Lily. But nothing prepared me for what happened on the day of her wedding when a single decision not to surrender my home ended with me in the back of an ambulance. The Grand Crest Hotel ballroom glittered under 100 chandeliers. 220 guests filled the round tables covered in white linen. Gold-trimmed place cards gleamed beside crystal glasses. Music from a live quartet floated through the air. To everyone in that room, it was the picture of a perfect society wedding. To me, it felt like a stage where my family would once again remind me of my place. I had arrived in a tailored navy dress that brushed my knees, simple pearl earrings, and a low bun. I wanted to look elegant but not outshine the bride. Lily floated through the crowd in a white gown that shimmered with tiny beads, her face glowing with the approval of every guest who looked her way. My mother stayed close by her side, whispering compliments, fussing with the veil, soaking in admiration as though it were her own. My father lingered near the bar, where his glass of whiskey never seemed to empty. When the reception was in full swing, my father suddenly clinked his glass with a spoon. The music stopped. All eyes turned to him. He cleared his throat red-faced from liquor, but loud and confident. "Family means everything," he boomed. "And today we have a gift for our Lily that will show just how much we love her." I froze before the words even left his mouth. As if rehearsed, he announced that I, Clara, had decided to give my sister the lake house in Lake Tahoe as her wedding present. He spoke it like fact, like something I had joyfully agreed to. The crowd erupted in applause, chairs scraped as people stood to cheer. Lily covered her mouth in feigned shock while a smile tugged at the corner of her lips. I stood up, my legs stiff. "That is not true." "I never agreed," I said, my voice carrying across the hall. A hush fell. My mother's smile faltered. A cousin whispered loudly, "Surely she is joking." Guests turned their heads from Lily to me as though I had interrupted a sacred ritual. Someone muttered, "Selfish." Another voice followed, "It is just a house. She is starting her family." My father's face turned crimson. He slammed his glass down, whiskey sloshing across the tablecloth. "You will not embarrass your sister on her day," he shouted. "Give her the house." "It is mine," I said clearly. "I paid for it. I never agreed to this." The room buzzed with disbelief. Some guests shook their heads. Others murmured about money not mattering as much as family. I felt the weight of 200 eyes pressing against my skin. Then it happened. My father staggered toward me, his steps heavy, his breath thick with alcohol. Before anyone could intervene, his fist connected with my chest. The blow knocked the air out of me. I stumbled backward, and my head struck the sharp corner of a banquet table. A crack of pain split through my skull. Warm liquid streamed down my temple. My knees gave out, and the ballroom spun into darkness. Gasps filled the room. Someone screamed. Chairs toppled. Silverware clattered to the floor. In the chaos, I was dimly aware of a phone held high above the crowd, its screen glowing with the red recording light of a live stream. When consciousness returned, I was no longer in the ballroom. Sirens wailed around me. The ceiling above was white and sterile. Straps secured me to a gurney. My head was wrapped in bandages. A paramedic leaned over, checking my pulse, while another pressed gauze against my scalp. "Stay with us," Clara, one of them said firmly. I tried to speak, but only managed a rasp. My chest burned from the impact of his fist. My throat ached from swallowed blood. As the ambulance swerved through traffic, the reality crashed over me. My father had hit me hard enough to send me to the emergency room. And why? Because I had dared to say no. I closed my eyes, the siren echoing in my skull. One thought repeated with every beat of my heart. This would not be the end of the story. This act of violence would not silence me. What started in that ballroom was only the beginning. I grew up in a family where roles were assigned long before I understood what roles meant. My younger sister Lily was born delicate and smiling, the kind of child people reached for instinctively. My parents treated her like a porcelain doll, dressing her in ribbons, praising her soft voice, telling everyone she was destined to be the perfect wife and mother. By contrast, Clara, was born with questions spilling out of me. I built towers out of cereal boxes, sketched buildings on the backs of old receipts, and asked my father why houses leaned the way they did in a storm. Instead of encouragement, I received frowns and dismissals. My mother said I was too serious for a girl. My father barked that I should let men worry about structures. I learned early that in our household, Lily was the adored princess, and I was the difficult one. As years passed, the division sharpened. At family gatherings, relatives would pat Lily's curls and comment on how pretty she looked in pastel dresses. To me, they would say things like, "Do not frown, Clara, it will give you wrinkles," or "Boys do not like girls who act smarter than them." I smiled tightly and excused myself to the library. I found refuge in books of design and architecture. I dreamed of cities where glass towers kissed the clouds and bridges stretched like ribbons across rivers. Those books felt like a world that did not judge me for being too ambitious. High school widened the gulf. Lily glided through social circles, elected homecoming queen, adored by teachers for her cheerfulness. I was the girl who stayed late in the drafting room, covered in pencil smudges, presenting sketches to a math teacher who said I had the brain of an engineer. When college letters arrived, my acceptance from MIT was treated like an inconvenience. My father said congratulations, but added that it was a shame I would be so far from family. My mother asked if I could not choose something easier so I would have time for dating. When Lily announced she was accepted into a local teaching college, the family threw her a party with balloons and cake. For me, there was a quick dinner and an envelope with a modest check to help with books. I left home at 18, knowing my value would never be recognized within those walls. At MIT, I thrived and nearly drowned at the same time. Studio classes consumed 70 hours a week. I slept under my drafting table and lived on coffee, but for the first time, people around me believed my drive was not a defect. Professors praised my vision, peers asked to partner with me on projects. Firms scouted my work even before graduation. When my designs were featured in a student exhibition in Boston, my parents did not come. They said it was too far, and Lily had a recital that night. I pretended not to care, but inside, I memorized every absent chair. After graduation, I joined a major architectural firm in Chicago. I started at the bottom drawing bathroom layouts, revising fire escape diagrams, hustling on red-eye flights to present concepts no senior partner wanted to do themselves. I worked 80 hours most weeks, sometimes more. My social life withered. Dating was nearly impossible because most men my age bristled at my schedule and my salary. Some called me intimidating. Others accused me of being cold because I would not cancel a client meeting for dinner. So I remained single and poured myself into work. Slowly, the rewards arrived. By my late 20s, I was leading design teams. My name appeared in Architectural Digest. One project in Miami, a luxury resort, paid me a bonus that allowed me to do something my family would never believe. I bought a lake house in Lake Tahoe outright. $2 million. No mortgage, no cosigner, no inheritance. Every inch of that property was earned through sleepless nights and unrelenting focus. I remember standing in the empty living room with floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing at the lake glistening beneath the sun. It felt like sanctuary, like proof I had created something lasting on my own terms. When I told my parents about the purchase, their reactions sliced me open. My father said, "What would a single woman do with a house that size?" My mother suggested it would be better if Lily had a place for her future children. They framed my achievement as wasteful, selfish excess. I realized then that nothing I did would ever shift their perspective. In their eyes, I was incomplete because I had no husband and no babies. My success was invisible. Yet I held onto that house fiercely. It became my escape. When deadlines crushed me, I would fly to Tahoe for weekends, wake at dawn, drink coffee on the deck, and feel human again. Friends from the firm joined me sometimes and marveled that I had such a retreat. They said it was inspirational. To my family, it was irrelevant. Holidays were always the same performance. Lily glowing with compliments about her teaching her engagement to Brian, the charming fiancé from a good family, her volunteer work at the Children's Hospital. Me sitting quietly at the table, enduring jabs about being too picky or too married to my work. My mother once said directly in front of relatives at Thanksgiving that she feared I would die alone. I swallowed the sting and reached for the cranberry sauce. As Lily's wedding approached, I hoped at least to play a supportive role. I transferred $60,000 to help with decorations and music. I called vendors, used my contacts to secure a prestigious florist, even arranged lighting through a colleague who owed me a favor. But not once was my name listed in the program. Not once did my parents acknowledge my contribution. In their minds, I was again the shadow that existed only to hold up their golden child. I remember standing in my bedroom the night before the wedding, smoothing down the tailored navy dress I had chosen. It was elegant but modest, paired with simple pearls. I looked in the mirror and whispered to myself that this was Lily's day, and I would not let my resentment spoil it. Yet deep down, a knot of dread tightened. My father had been drinking more in the days leading up to the event. My mother had dropped pointed comments about family generosity. I felt storm clouds gathering, though I tried to ignore them. Walking into the Grand Crest ballroom on that morning, I saw the roses, the gold accents, the glittering chandeliers. Guests buzzed with excitement. And then, I heard it again, the whispers. Poor Clara, still single at 34. Imagine what a waste all that education is when she has no children. At least, Lily is giving her parents what they deserve. Every remark cut, but I kept my smile frozen. I focused on the table settings, on ensuring candles were straight on, avoiding confrontation. Yet, no matter how I tried to blend into the background, I could feel it coming, a test of loyalty harsher than any I had endured before. Looking back from the hospital bed later that night, I understood that the ambush had been planned long before the first toast was poured. My family had written a script where my role was the donor of a house worth millions, the silent sister who would step aside yet again. They never imagined I would break character. They never imagined I would say no. The morning of Lily's wedding began with the same mixture of tension and duty that had colored so many family milestones. I arrived early at the Grand Crest Hotel to check on details I had quietly paid for. The florist I had booked through a personal connection had delivered hundreds of white roses, each arranged in tall crystal vases that lined the ballroom. The string quartet tuned their instruments in the corner, secured through a favor owed to me by a former client. The lighting design, subtle golds and soft whites, was something I had negotiated with a company I had once collaborated with on a downtown project. All of it had cost me $60,000, a contribution my parents had gratefully accepted without ever once mentioning it to the rest of the family. As I walked the perimeter of the ballroom, adjusting candles and checking the placement of programs, I overheard two aunts commenting on how generous Lily's future in-laws had been. No one mentioned my name. In our family, silence around my sacrifices had become tradition. In the dressing suite upstairs, I found my mother bustling around Lily, who sat radiant in her beaded gown. "You look like a princess," my mother cooed, fussing with the veil, her eyes shining with pride. When she noticed me in the doorway, she frowned. "And you? Clara, in that pantsuit, you look like a lawyer, not a sister." I smoothed the front of my tailored navy dress and said simply, "Good morning." Lily beamed, her cheeks flushed, her hands resting delicately on her lap as bridesmaids fluttered around her. She was the star of the day, the center of every approving gaze. I was the spare part that did not fit the picture. The words about my outfit stung because they reflected a lifetime of being told I was too formal, too sharp, too much like a man. But I said nothing. I had learned long ago that arguing only confirmed their judgment. Back in the ballroom, guests began to arrive. My relatives descended in clusters, kissing cheeks, balancing cocktails, and whispering loudly enough for me to hear. "Still single at 34, poor Mrs. Whitman. At least she has Lily." Some chuckled. Others shook their heads. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water and kept my eyes fixed on the table centerpieces I had designed. Anything to keep from showing reaction. Inside me, frustration coiled like a spring. I remembered every night I had stayed late at the office, every flight I had taken across the country to present to clients, every penny I had saved to build the life I wanted. Yet here I was, treated as if all of it were meaningless because I stood without a husband at my side. At one point, my cousin Jeffrey approached with his new wife. He grinned and said loud enough for the group around him, "Clara, maybe if you spent less time in drafting rooms and more time in bedrooms, you would not be alone today." Laughter erupted. I forced a polite smile, muttered congratulations on his recent marriage, and excused myself before anger could spill over. These were the kinds of barbs I had endured since adolescence. Each one cut deeper than it appeared because it reinforced the narrative that I was defective. I retreated to a quiet corner near the grand windows overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered in the morning sun. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine my lake house in Tahoe, the still water, the air that smelled of pine, the silence that embraced me there. It was my sanctuary, the one place no one could touch. Thinking of it gave me strength, though I did not yet know how much I would need it. My father passed by with a glass of whiskey already half empty, even though the ceremony had not begun. He slapped me on the shoulder hard enough to sting and said, "Family comes first. Clara, you will understand one day when you have your own." His tone was more warning than advice. I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat and replied, "Of course, Dad. Anything to keep the peace." Deep down, I suspected that the wedding would not pass without some maneuver to belittle me, but I never imagined the scale of what they had planned. I busied myself with small tasks, ensuring candles were lit evenly, instructing servers to adjust chairs, tidying the guest book table. It was easier to be useful than to endure more cutting remarks. When guests asked where the money for the lavish decorations had come from, my mother proudly credited Lily's fiancé's family. I stood within earshot, my contribution erased. That was the pattern. I built, I gave, I supported, and then I vanished in their narrative. By the time the ceremony ended and the reception began, the weight of invisibility pressed heavily on me. Relatives danced, glasses clinked, Lily and Brian posed for photographs bathed in flashbulbs. I remained at the edge of the crowd, smiling politely, laughing when expected, but feeling like a ghost at my own sister's celebration. If anyone noticed my silence, they mistook it for aloofness. None saw the storm gathering inside me. The day should have been about Lily, about joy and family unity, but instead it became the stage for an ambush I would never forget. The signs had been there, my father's drinking, my mother's barbed comments about family generosity, the subtle reminders that family means sacrifice. Yet even with those warnings, I was not prepared when my father rose with his glass and clinked it for attention. I did not know in that moment that my years of quiet endurance were about to end in blood and bandages. Looking back, it seems inevitable. They had built a script where I was the expendable character, the one who would hand over a sanctuary bought with 10 years of relentless work, simply because the golden child was beginning a new life. They believed I would stay silent as always. They never considered that this time I would refuse. The first thing I remember clearly after the chaos was the rhythmic beeping of a monitor and the antiseptic sting of hospital air filling my nostrils. My eyelids felt weighted with iron as I fought to open them. Harsh fluorescent lights blurred above me, their glow stabbing through my skull like needles. For a moment, I panicked, disoriented, unsure if the nightmare in the ballroom had been real. Then I shifted slightly, and pain shot through my chest, sharp and deep where my father's fist had landed. My head throbbed in waves, bandages tight around my scalp. It was real. Every horrifying second was real. A nurse leaned over me, her voice calm but firm. "Clara, you are in Chicago, General. You suffered a concussion and a deep laceration on your head. You are stable, but you need rest." I tried to sit up, but the world spun violently, and she pressed me back down with gentle hands. "Easy," she said. "You took a serious hit. We have stitched the wound 6 stitches above your temple, and you are being monitored for brain trauma. You are safe now." Safe. The word tasted bitter. How could I be safe when the person who had struck me was my own father, when the violence had come not from a stranger, but from the man who was supposed to protect me? I closed my eyes again, images flashing like shards of glass. The shocked faces, the phone raised high with its red recording light, the sound of my mother's voice twisting the narrative even as blood pooled under my head. Tears stung my eyes, but I forced them back. I had learned long ago that in my family, weakness was used as evidence against me. The nurse offered me a sip of water through a straw. My lips were cracked, my throat dry as sand. I managed a few swallows and whispered, "How bad is it?" She assured me that with rest I would recover, though headaches and dizziness might last for weeks. She hesitated before adding, "Your injuries are consistent with an assault. Do you want to speak with the police?" The word assault sliced through me. It was the clinical truth for what had happened, stripped of the excuses my family would surely craft. I nodded faintly, but before the conversation could continue, the curtain drew back and a young doctor stepped in holding a tablet. He examined me carefully, running tests on my memory and reflexes, then confirmed the nurse's explanation. "You are fortunate it was not worse," he said gravely. "Blows to the head can be fatal." My pulse quickened as I realized how close I had come. All for a house I had earned with my own sweat. Rage coiled in my chest even through the pain. When the doctor left, I lay in silence staring at the ceiling tiles, replaying the ambush like a film loop. Each detail sharpened the smug tilt of Lily's lips the way applause had erupted the force of my father's fist. My body trembled not just from injury, but from humiliation. 200 guests had witnessed my degradation. Some would whisper sympathy, others would call me selfish. But none could erase the truth, now etched into memory and perhaps into thousands of phone screens. My phone buzzed faintly on the tray beside the bed. The nurse handed it to me. Notifications flooded the screen messages from coworkers, a dozen missed calls from numbers I recognized as relatives, even alerts from social media. With shaky hands, I opened one link and saw it. The live stream. My heart slammed against my ribs as I watched grainy footage of myself standing firm, declaring, "No," then crumpling under my father's blow. The video had already been shared hundreds of times, comments multiplying by the second. Some expressed horror, others disbelief, many demanded justice. Strangers were siding with me in ways my own blood never had. My chest tightened as I scrolled. The humiliation of being exposed warred with the realization that I was no longer invisible. For the first time, the cruelty of my family was undeniable, preserved on video. They could not bury this under gossip or gaslighting. The evidence was out there multiplying. The nurse saw the screen and said softly, "You do not have to watch that now." But I shook my head. I needed to see it, needed to absorb the reality. Every share, every outraged comment was proof that I was not crazy, that my pain was not exaggerated. For years I had endured slights alone. Now the world was watching. Exhaustion pulled me back down, but before sleep claimed me, I made a silent vow. This would not end in that hospital bed. I would not let them write me as the villain, the selfish sister, the difficult daughter. The truth was in the open, and I would use it. I closed my eyes against the pulsing lights, clutching the phone to my chest like a weapon. In the darkness behind my eyelids, I whispered to myself, "This is not the end. It is the beginning." Revenge would not come in screams or fists. It would come with precision, with proof, with consequences they never imagined. The beeping of the monitor steadied my breathing, slowed, and in the sterile quiet of the ER, I felt a flicker of strength returning. They had broken my body for the moment, but they had also handed me the one thing I had always lacked: undeniable evidence. And with that, I knew the balance of power was about to shift. The hospital room was quiet, except for the steady hum of machines and the muffled footsteps of nurses outside the curtain. My head ached in pulses. My chest bruised deeply, but beneath the physical pain, a sharper force had begun to stir. Anger, yes, but also clarity, the kind of clarity that years of endurance had never given me. For once, there was no denying what had happened. My father had struck me in front of 200 people. Blood had pooled on the ballroom floor, while my mother tried to spin the story as though I were to blame. Yet the truth had escaped their control because of that glowing red dot on a groomsman's phone. The live stream had already been shared across platforms, snippets going viral before I even left the reception hall. For the first time in my life, the silence that had always trapped me was shattered. My phone buzzed again on the side table, the vibrations rattling the thin plastic tray. With effort, I reached for it. Dozens of messages poured in from colleagues, acquaintances, even distant relatives. But one name froze me in place. Ethan Grant, my mentor, My boss, the CEO of Grant Construction, a man who commanded boardrooms and government contracts with equal ease. I had met him 6 years earlier when I was still clawing my way up the ladder at my firm. He had seen something in my designs and pulled me onto a project others thought was too ambitious for my age. Over time, he had become the closest thing I had to family in the professional world. His message was short, but heavy with intent. I saw the live stream. Do you want me to intervene? My hands shook as I typed back. Not yet. Let them dig their own grave first. Seconds later, my phone rang. I pressed it carefully to my ear, wincing as the bandages tugged. His voice was calm, steady, the voice of someone used to crises. Clara, the footage is everywhere. This is not something that will vanish in a day. You need to decide how you want to handle it. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. I remembered a conversation months ago when Ethan had insisted on adding a clause to the purchase contract for my Lake Tahoe house. At the time, it had seemed excessive, even paranoid. He had said you need protection against coercion, especially from family. I had laughed, insisting my parents were difficult, but not dangerous. He had stared at me across his desk and said, "Trust me, I have seen too many women in power stripped of what they earned by those who felt entitled to it." That clause ensured that if anyone tried to force me to surrender the property, Grant Construction retained first rights and legal standing to intervene. I had signed the papers thinking it was just another safeguard in a world of contracts. Now it felt like prophecy. Ethan's voice cut into my memory. "The choice is yours, Clara. We can activate that clause, bring in lawyers, make this public in a way your father cannot ignore. But it will be messy." I whispered, "I know. I am not ready. Not yet." Silence stretched across the line. Then he said, "You do not have to fight alone. Remember that." When the call ended, I lay back against the stiff pillows, my mind racing despite exhaustion. The easy choice would have been to let Ethan storm in immediately to hand the reins of battle to someone with power greater than my father's. But something inside me resisted. For years I had been painted as weak, selfish, unworthy. If this confrontation ended with Ethan rescuing me, it would only confirm their narrative that I could not stand on my own. I wanted them to see me not as a pawn, but as the one who chose to fight. So I decided to wait. I would give them space to reveal the full measure of their arrogance. Let them whisper excuses. Let them dismiss the attack as a misunderstanding. Let them show the world who they truly were. The live stream would keep spreading. The court of public opinion was already turning. Each hour that passed without an apology, without accountability, was another nail in the coffin of their reputation. I stared at the ceiling, breathing through the pain, and repeated in my head, "This is not the end." In the sterile quiet, I imagined the lake house at dawn, the still water glowing gold under the rising sun. That house was not just property. It was the embodiment of every sacrifice, every late night at the drafting table, every contract won against odds. They had tried to rip it from me through manipulation, and when that failed, through violence. But it remained mine, and so did my will. I thought of Lily's smile, the way she had feigned shock when my father made the announcement, the satisfaction flickering in her eyes. She believed she had won before the battle had even begun. She was wrong. For the first time in years, I felt strength not in pleasing others, but in refusal. No was a small word, but it carried the weight of my entire life. It had knocked me to the floor, it had cost me blood and stitches, but it had also opened a path I had never walked before. A path where I no longer bowed to family scripts. I drifted between pain and determination until dawn light filtered through the blinds. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, murmuring encouragement. Each time they asked how I felt, I answered truthfully, sore but stronger, because beneath the bruises a fire had been lit. I knew my father would not apologize. My mother would not admit wrong. Lily would not release her claim. They would double down as they always had. And when they did, I would be ready not as the forgotten daughter, but as the woman who had finally chosen herself. Back at the Grand Crest Hotel ballroom, the night had unraveled into uneasy fragments. Guests whispered in clusters, the clink of glasses replaced by tense murmurs, and the glow of phone screens lit corners as people replayed the shocking footage they had just witnessed. The dance floor, once glittering with celebration, now lay awkwardly empty. Some guests had left quietly, others lingered out of morbid curiosity. My father sat slumped at the head table, his jaw set in stone, his glass refilled despite the chaos. My mother hovered near him, whispering frantic reassurances that everything could still be salvaged. Lily dabbed at her eyes with tissues playing the role of devastated bride, while Brian's parents exchanged tight whispers, their faces pale with unease. The air was thick with discomfort, like a storm cloud that refused to break. And then the doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open. The sudden movement drew every gaze. Ethan Grant strode in tall and composed, his tailored charcoal suit catching the light. Two attorneys followed at his sides, each carrying slim leather briefcases. The room fell silent. My father's face drained of color as recognition hit him. He had been pursuing a meeting with Ethan Grant for months, desperate to secure a contract that would stabilize his struggling company. Now the man stood here uninvited, his presence heavy with authority. Conversations cut off mid-sentence, chairs scraped as people shifted nervously. Ethan's calm gaze swept the room before landing on my father. "Richard Whitman," he said evenly. "We need to clarify something." The microphone, still on the head table, carried his voice across the ballroom with crisp clarity. My mother stepped forward, bristling. "This is a family matter." Ethan's expression did not change. "It became a public matter the moment your husband struck his daughter in front of 200 witnesses and the moment this was broadcast live across the internet." A ripple of shock rolled through the guests. My father tried to rise, but his legs betrayed him, wobbling as he gripped the table for support. "You have no right to interfere here," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Ethan continued without pause. "There seems to be a misunderstanding about property. Clara Whitman is not simply an architect working quietly in an office. She is the lead designer of Grant Construction's Pacific project, valued at $200 million. Gasps rippled across the hall. Eyes widened. Whispers darted between tables. People who had dismissed me hours earlier now realized they had underestimated the woman they called selfish. Ethan's voice remained steady, measured. That Lake Tahoe residence was granted to Clara as part of her executive compensation package. It is protected by contractual clauses that recognize her as sole owner with corporate safeguards against coercion. Any attempt to force its transfer triggers immediate legal action. My mother sputtered. "You cannot come here and talk about contracts during my daughter's wedding." Ethan fixed her with a cool stare. "Your daughter's wedding became irrelevant when you tried to stage an ambush that stripped another daughter of her property." He gestured subtly, and one of the attorneys placed a stack of documents on the head table. "Clause 15.3 of the agreement," he said. "Everyone is free to read." Guests leaned forward, curiosity and disbelief mixing. My father's hand shook as he flipped through the pages. "This is outrageous," he barked. Ethan's tone sharpened. "What is outrageous is a man striking his daughter for refusing to surrender her home. What is outrageous is a family treating a woman's success as communal property to be redistributed at will." He raised his eyes to the audience. "And what is most outrageous is believing this behavior would remain hidden in a world where everyone carries a camera in their pocket." All around the ballroom, phones buzzed with notifications, screens flashing as news outlets picked up the viral video. Someone whispered, "It is already on Twitter." Another voice said Facebook Live had over 50,000 views. My mother's lips trembled. She glanced at Lily, who was sobbing louder now, her makeup streaked her performance as the wronged bride reaching a fever pitch. Brian stood stiffly at her side, his parents exchanging looks that spoke volumes about their discomfort. Ethan moved closer to the head table. "Richard, you control nothing here. Your company already leans on contracts with us. Your credibility is collapsing by the minute. My attorneys are prepared to file injunctions if necessary. You will acknowledge Clara's rights publicly, and you will cease this behavior immediately." My father's face twisted in rage. He tried to muster defiance, but the weight of eyes around him, the cameras still recording the silent judgment pressing down, left him cornered. He opened his mouth, but nothing coherent emerged. Ethan let the silence hang until it suffocated. Then he turned toward the audience again. "Clara is not here tonight to defend herself. She is in the hospital because of the violence committed in this very room." Gasps echoed again, though most had already guessed the severity. This is not just a family dispute. This is assault. Clear, undeniable recorded assault. The word rang like a gavel striking. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Some looked toward the exits as though afraid to be complicit by remaining. Others leaned in, eager to see how far this confrontation would go. Lily cried out through her tears, "Clara should have wanted me to be happy. She ruined everything." Ethan's gaze cut to her unflinching. Happiness built on theft and violence is not happiness. It is rot. A hush followed. Even the waitstaff paused mid-step holding trays as if the moment itself demanded their attention. My father tried one last defense. "This is private business." Ethan countered smoothly. "Not anymore. Your guests have seen the internet has seen, and now your business partners are seeing. Consequences are coming whether you acknowledge them or not." He placed a hand on the documents before him. "These are not threats. They are protections Clara wisely secured. The only choice you have now is whether you will acknowledge her dignity voluntarily or be forced to by courts and shareholders." My mother's face crumpled in fury. She grabbed the microphone and spat. "She is ungrateful, selfish, poisoned by corporate culture. She would destroy her sister's wedding for her pride." The microphone amplified every bitter syllable. Ethan's expression hardened further. What destroys a wedding is a parent striking their child unconscious in front of 200 people. What destroys a family is choosing one daughter's comfort over another's autonomy. He let the words hang before adding, "She is not selfish. She is strong, and strength is something you clearly cannot tolerate." A stunned hush fell again. Guests who had whispered against me earlier now avoided eye contact with my parents. Ethan signaled to his attorneys and they began distributing copies of the clause to anyone who asked. The spectacle was undeniable. The Whitmans' attempt at coercion had exploded into a public reckoning. My father's hand shook around his glass. My mother tried to soothe Lily, who wailed theatrically, but the tide had turned. The ballroom that had been their stage was now their courtroom, and Ethan Grant presided with the authority they could not challenge. In that moment, though, I lay in a hospital bed across the city, the balance of power shifted forever. The daughter they had dismissed as difficult had become the one protected by the most powerful man in the room, and for once there was no script they could write to erase it. The ballroom vibrated with tension as Ethan Grant remained at the head table, his presence a wall none dared to breach. Guests whispered fiercely, their voices bouncing under the chandeliers, but no one left. Everyone sensed history unfolding, the kind of scandal that would ripple far beyond that glittering room. My father's face was ashen, his fingers twitching against the glass he clutched. My mother hovered behind him, torn between rage and panic, while Lily clung to Brian like a child clings to a raft in stormy seas. Brian's parents stood stiff and cold, their disapproval radiating through the air. Ethan raised a hand and one of his attorneys clicked a remote. A projector screen lowered from the far wall, the kind normally reserved for wedding montages of childhood photos and honeymoon slideshows. But tonight, it would display something far less innocent. A still frame appeared, first grainy but recognizable, me standing in the ballroom, my mouth open as I declared my refusal. A hush fell. Then the video rolled. The live stream captured everything from my father's announcement that I was gifting the lake house to my clear and public denial to the moment he stormed across the floor and struck me squarely in the chest. The impact, my fall, the crack of skull against wood, the smear of blood, the gasps of guests, all replayed in high definition. No laughter, no applause, no sympathetic excuses could erase what was seared into that footage. The room filled with the muffled sounds of the video, the thud of the blow, the scream of a child, the clatter of silverware. People gasped again as though seeing it fresh, some covering their mouths, others shaking their heads in disbelief. My mother hissed, turn it off," but Ethan's attorney ignored her. When the screen went dark, Ethan said evenly, "This is not rumor or exaggeration. This is evidence. 200 witnesses saw it, and now tens of thousands more have too." A guest blurted, "It is on CNN already." Phones lit up across the room as people confirmed the news, spreading like wildfire. My father stammered, You do not understand. Clara was being selfish. She humiliated us. Ethan's tone was surgical. What I understand is assault. What I understand is attempted coercion of corporate assets. What I understand is conduct unbecoming of leadership. He gestured to his attorneys. Clause 15.3 triggered the moment Richard Whitman struck his daughter while demanding transfer of her property. That clause gives Grant Construction authority to intervene to protect the asset and the executive. In plain terms, you tried to steal from her and you attacked her when she resisted. Gasps swept again, sharper this time. A man at one table muttered, "This will ruin him." My mother tried again, her voice shrill. "She is our daughter. We have the right to decide what is best for family." Ethan's reply was cold steel. "What you call family, I call exploitation. Family does not ambush one member to enrich another. Family does not beat a woman into unconsciousness for saying no." He let the silence stretch heavy with judgment before he turned to the guests. "You all witnessed this tonight. Ask yourselves what you saw. Did you see generosity refused, or did you see entitlement unmasked?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Even those who had whispered selfish earlier now shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to align themselves with brutality. Ethan pressed further. "Richard Whitman, do you deny striking your daughter?" My father sputtered. "I was drunk. I did not mean." Ethan cut him off. "Intent is irrelevant. The video is undeniable." Then he looked toward the audience again. "This is not about alcohol. This is about power and control, and it ends now." One of the attorneys produced another document and slid it across the table. "Emergency shareholder meeting within 24 hours, Ethan said. "I hold 38% of Whitman Development through trusts and partnerships. Combined with the Jensen family's 15% I control majority influence. Richard, your leadership is under review." My father sagged back into his chair, his breath shallow, his skin gray. My mother's mouth fell open. "You cannot do this," she shrieked. "This is our family. This is our legacy." Ethan's expression did not change. "Your legacy is a live stream viewed by 500,000 people in 4 hours. Your legacy is a bride's wedding night turned into evidence for an assault case." He turned slightly as if to address me, though I was absent, and his voice carried across the hall. "Clara deserves better. She deserves respect, not bruises. She deserves autonomy, not ambushes." The guests sat in stunned silence, the words reverberating like a sermon. Then Ethan asked the question that hung like a blade. Would Clara like to press charges? The attorney held up a phone on speaker. My recorded voice, trembling but firm from the hospital bed, filled the hall. "Yes." The word landed like thunder. Gasps, whispers, the snap of photographs, all exploded at once. My father crumpled his shoulders, collapsing inward, while my mother screeched, "Ungrateful, ungrateful," over and over. Lily sobbed louder, protesting that her wedding was ruined, that I had destroyed her day. Ethan's gaze cut to her. "No, Clara did not ruin your wedding. Your parents did. They turned it into a stage for violence and greed. You stood by as it happened. That silence is complicity." Lily choked on her tears, unable to answer. Brian's parents exchanged a final look, then rose from their seats. "This is over." Brian's father declared, his voice shaking with disgust. "Our family will not be tied to this." Brian hesitated, torn between loyalty and humiliation, but followed his parents out, leaving Lily clutching at empty air. Her wails echoed down the hall like a dirge. The screen behind Ethan flickered again, displaying a live counter of shares and views. 1 million and climbing. The weight of public judgment bore down on the Whitmans with crushing inevitability. Ethan gathered the documents, placed them neatly on the table, and looked directly at my father. "You have 48 hours to issue a public apology acknowledging Clara's rights and condemning this violence. If you fail, I will call the board and strip you of your company." This is not negotiation. This is consequence. My father's lips moved, but no sound emerged. My mother glared with venom, but her power was gone. The ballroom remained frozen in silence, the authority of Ethan's presence undeniable. He gave a final nod to the attorneys, who began collecting signatures from witnesses willing to testify. Then he straightened his tie and addressed the room one last time. Tonight, you have seen what happens when strength is treated as selfishness, when independence is punished instead of honored. Remember what you witnessed. Do not let anyone tell you it was anything less than violence. With that, he turned and walked toward the exit, his attorneys following. The doors closed behind them, and the room erupted into frantic chatter, the collapse of a family's facade echoing louder than the music ever had. In that moment, though, I lay miles away in a hospital bed. The balance of my life shifted forever. They had tried to strip me of my sanctuary. Instead, they had stripped themselves bare before the world. By the following morning, the video had spread far beyond the glittering walls of the Grand Crest Hotel. News outlets ran headlines like "Father Strikes Daughter at Sister's Wedding Over $2 million House," and clips of my collapse replayed on television online everywhere I turned. Hashtags with my name trended on Twitter. Strangers dissected every frame, pausing on the moment of impact, the shock in guests' faces, the red stain spreading across the white tablecloth. In less than 24 hours, the live stream had reached more than 1 million views. I lay in the hospital bed watching it unfold, still sore and dizzy, but unable to look away. My phone vibrated constantly with messages of outrage support and questions from reporters. For the first time, my family's cruelty was not hidden behind closed doors. It was exposed for the world to see. Contracts began collapsing almost immediately. My father's company had been in shaky condition for months, propped up by promises of expansion and the hope of new partnerships. Now clients scrambled to distance themselves. One email after another arrived in the company's inbox announcing terminations. A major supplier wrote, "We cannot in good conscience continue our relationship given the public behavior displayed by Mr. Whitman." Another long-term client canceled a multi-million-dollar project citing reputational risk. Within days, 6 contracts were gone. Employees began resigning, unwilling to tie their futures to a sinking ship. I heard all this not from my parents, but from colleagues and business contacts who knew I had to be aware. The collapse was rapid and merciless. Social media amplified every consequence. Clips of my mother calling me selfish circulated alongside the footage of the slap. People wrote captions like, "Now we know where the problem started." Lily's teary declarations that I had ruined her wedding were met with sarcasm and disgust. Commenters wrote, "She cared more about a party than her sister's safety, and imagine defending a father who knocked his daughter unconscious." Brian's family, already humiliated at the ballroom, made their position clear. His parents released a statement saying they were deeply disturbed by the incident and suspending the marriage until further notice. Privately, they reached out to me through an intermediary to express sympathy and to apologize for what their son's new family had tried to do. Their message ended with a line that made me pause. No one should be forced to choose between blood and dignity. I wondered if Lily read those words and understood what they meant. My mother, meanwhile, doubled down, posting long rants on Facebook about her ungrateful, career-obsessed daughter. Screenshots spread quickly, accompanied by mocking comments. One read, "She handed the world proof she is a narcissist." Another simply said, "Blood is not family, respect is." My father remained silent publicly, but I knew his silence was not noble. It was strategic. He was scrambling to salvage what little remained of his business empire. Rumors circulated that investors were pressuring him to resign, that the emergency shareholder meeting Ethan Grant promised was looming. The humiliation aged him visibly. A friend who had glimpsed him in public said he looked 10 years older in a week. Meanwhile, messages poured into me from strangers across the country. Survivors of abuse wrote that they felt seen watching me stand firm. Women in business said they knew too well the sting of being treated as selfish for protecting their work. Cousins I had not spoken to in years sent apologies for not realizing the weight I had carried. Even colleagues at my firm who had admired me from a distance now reached out with warmth. For once, my story was not being rewritten by my parents. It was being heard in my voice. Still, the fallout was brutal. Lily's wedding was effectively over. Guests returned gifts. Vendors posted cryptic messages about unpaid bills. Brian moved back into his parents' home. The fairy tale my mother had tried to script dissolved into scandal. Lily sent me a single text late one night. "You destroyed everything." I stared at it for a long time before replying. "I refused to be destroyed for you." The messages stopped after that. Yet in the wreckage, I found unexpected strength. Ethan checked on me daily, updating me on the legal maneuvers underway. He confirmed that the protective clause around my lake house had activated fully, making any attempt by my parents to seize it legally impossible. He assured me that public sympathy was on my side, that witnesses had already agreed to testify, that even the photographer had sent us hundreds of high-resolution images capturing every stage of the ambush. The evidence was airtight, and while my parents scrambled, I healed. Each day in the hospital, my body felt lighter, my resolve sharper. I read messages from strangers at midnight when pain kept me awake. I whispered to myself that I was no longer invisible. The viral storm had cost me blood and bruises, but it had given me something priceless: validation. My father had once said family comes first. Now the world was telling him what family really meant. The irony was almost poetic. By trying to erase me in favor of Lily, they had erased themselves. Their reputation, their contracts, their credibility all collapsed in days. And I remained standing bruised but unbroken, my sanctuary untouchable. When I was discharged from the hospital a week later, I returned not to my childhood home, but to the Lake Tahoe house that had nearly been stolen from me. The drive up the winding roads was long and painful. Each bump sent waves of ache through my ribs. Each turn reminded me of the bruises still blooming across my chest. But when the lake finally came into view, stretching wide and silver under the morning light, a deep calm settled over me. This was my sanctuary. The house stood exactly as I had left it, its glass windows gleaming, its wooden beams steady, its silence unbroken. I had the locks changed that same day, instructing security that my parents' names were to be permanently banned from entry. The locksmith did not ask questions. He had seen the video like nearly everyone else, and when he handed me the new keys, he said quietly, "Good for you." My first act after settling in was to hang a framed photograph of my late grandmother above the fireplace. She had been the only one in the family who once whispered to me, "Clara, never shrink yourself." Every time I looked at her smile, I felt less alone. Slowly, I built a new rhythm. Mornings began with coffee on the deck, overlooking the water, my breath fogging in the cool air. I journaled daily, pouring out anger, grief, and then, eventually, hope. Work called quickly. Ethan insisted that I take time off, but also told me the board had voted unanimously to promote me to Director of Global Projects. The raise and stock options doubled my financial stability. For the first time in my career, I felt not just respected but valued at the highest level. Yet the real victory was personal. No one could take this house, this life, this peace from me. Ethan and his wife invited me to family dinners, and I found myself laughing with their daughters, 2 college students who told me I was proof they did not have to apologize for being ambitious. My colleagues rallied around me, sending flowers, checking in on calls, reminding me that I was not defined by the violence but by how I stood afterward. With each passing week, the bruises faded, the headaches lessened, and the strength returned. My father's company, meanwhile, unraveled. Ethan informed me that after the emergency shareholder meeting, Richard Whitman had been forced to step down. Investors no longer trusted him. Clients would not return calls. The empire he had tried to preserve by sacrificing me had dissolved in his hands. My mother clung to denial, telling anyone who listened that I had destroyed the family, but most people had seen the footage and knew the truth. Lily's marriage ended quietly. Brian's parents insisted he step away until Lily confronted her family's toxicity. She sent me another message months later, dripping with bitterness. "I hope you are happy. You got what you wanted." I stared at it for a long moment before replying, "I got what I earned." There is a difference. I never heard from her again. In rebuilding, I found myself leaning less on blood relatives and more on chosen family. Friends visited the lake house and marveled at its serenity. We shared wine on the deck, laughter echoing against the water. I began mentoring younger architects, determined to give them the support I had longed for. I donated part of my raise to a shelter for women escaping abusive households, wanting my victory to ripple outward. And in quiet moments, standing by the windows as the sun set behind the mountains, I felt something I had never felt before: peace unmarred by conditional love. The scars on my body remained faint reminders of what had happened, but they no longer burned. They marked survival, not shame. I realized I had not lost a family. I had shed a burden. In its place, I built something stronger. Something mine. The lake house was not just property. It was proof of resilience, proof that I could endure betrayal and still rise. Each sunrise over the water whispered the same truth I had chosen myself, and that choice would always be enough. Looking back now, with distance and clarity, I see that the day of Lily's wedding was less an ending than a beginning. For years, I had lived in the shadow of family expectations, shrinking myself to keep the peace, surrendering recognition so my sister could shine, absorbing insult after insult until they became background noise. That night in the ballroom, when my father's fist connected with my chest and my skull struck the wood, something inside me broke, but something stronger also awakened. I finally understood that family is not defined by blood alone, and love without respect is not love at all. The lake house at Lake Tahoe is still mine, and every morning when I stand by the windows with coffee in hand and watch sunlight spread across the water, I remind myself why. It is not about wealth or property, though those things matter when they represent years of work. It is about boundaries, dignity, and survival. For too long, I believed setting boundaries meant being selfish. I was told ambition made me cold, that independence made me less of a woman, that saying no was cruelty. But the truth is, boundaries are not selfish. They are a declaration that you are human worthy and unwilling to be diminished. That night, I chose myself, and though it cost me my father's company, my mother's approval, and my sister's affection, it gave me back my life. The viral video did more than expose violence. It exposed entitlement favoritism and the quiet cruelty that had threaded through my family for decades. And in its wake, I discovered something profound. When you finally refuse to play the role others write for you, you discover the strength to write your own story. That story does not need to be loud or dramatic every day. Sometimes it is as simple as waking in a home that belongs only to you, as steady as breathing without fear, as ordinary as being surrounded by people who see you as enough without condition. Blood does not make you family. Respect does. I share this not to invite pity, but to remind anyone listening that you are not obligated to tolerate abuse, whether it comes with fists, words, or expectations that strip you of dignity. You do not owe your achievements to those who mocked your efforts. You do not have to hand over what you earned just because someone claims family deserves it. And you certainly do not need to accept violence in the name of peace. If anything in my story resonates with you, know that your boundaries matter. Your success is yours. Your peace is worth more than their approval. If you are struggling with toxic relatives who demand more than they give, who expect you to sacrifice your joy so they can maintain their comfort, hear me when I say you are not alone. There are communities and people who will stand with you, even strangers who recognize your worth more clearly than those bound to you by name. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to walk away. I lost the illusion of family that night, but what I gained was immeasurable self-respect, chosen relationships that nourish instead of drain, and the knowledge that I can endure and still thrive. The scars remind me daily, but they no longer define me. Instead, they guide me forward. So I ask you, if you believe boundaries matter, type boundaries in the comments below. Share your story if you have one, because speaking it aloud breaks the silence that allows cruelty to grow. Tell me where you are listening from, because I love knowing these stories reach people everywhere who understand what it means to fight for dignity. And subscribe if you want more stories that honor strength, resilience, and the power of choosing yourself. Are you Team Clara for standing firm, or do you believe family should always come first, even when it means surrendering everything? That conversation matters because too many people are still told that blood excuses abuse. Let us challenge that together. Remember this above all else. Your peace is not negotiable, your dignity is not disposable, and your life belongs to you, not to those who would take it for their own comfort. Choose yourself, always.